Our next speaker is, let me get my glasses on so I can make sure I read it all accurately, I should bring up some special fun because I don't know, he hasn't told me it's going to be humorous, but he was last year's winner of the humorous contest with at Speakers Bureau. We had a humorist last year and he was a winner last year. And we are having contests again in December. I'll let you know ahead of time. We will be doing table topics and tall tales. So we start thinking about those tall tales in December. Anyway, his introduction is Dan Schroff. He has been a Toastmaster for 10 years, over 10 years now. He's enjoyed every minute of it, from area governor to division governor. Yes, that's when they were called division governors before getting his QS. Tonight, he will talk about success. Who do I think is most successful person I've ever met? And what do I consider success to be? It may be a surprise to some of you. What he considers success and what the world in general considers success. With that, our next speaker is Dan Schroff. Success.
Thank you, Tom. Fellow Toastmasters, tonight I wanted to talk on success and my opinion of what success is, and I'm going to tell you who the most successful person I've ever known is. First, I've seen and talked with a lot of people, and the world's version of success is pretty much, you'd say, your Bezos, Musk, the dude from Virgin Air, basically the billionaires club in their race for space. Obviously, you've got to be a little bit successful to have that kind of money to waste on taking a trip to go to zero gravity and come back home. Other people think of success as movie stars, comedians. Robin Williams, arguably one of the best comedians ever and a fantastic actor. But I base my definition of success a little bit differently than most people. My basis of success and what I consider is based in our Declaration of Independence, believe it or not. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, being among these life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So before I tell you who who I consider the most successful is, let me tell you why I consider these to be the measure of success. If you could capture life or liberty or the pursuit of happiness and make it your own, you'd be successful. If you could grab onto two of these, you would be very successful. And if you could embrace life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness completely, you would have to be one of the most successful people around. Also, all men are created equal. I do believe that. Some people have taken that to mean something different, that no, it doesn't have the same meaning. How could somebody who's born in the Bronx be created equal to somebody born in the Hamptons? How could somebody born in the slums of LA be equal to somebody born in Beverly Hills? I don't believe that that's what they meant when they said we're all created equal. I think what they meant was we all have that equal ability to grasp onto the success and grasp onto life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That person who I consider did all of these is my dad. My dad is by far the most successful man I know. The reason I say that is when it came to life, my dad started every day of his life like it was the first day he'd had this life. He embraced that day like a kid in a candy store who just found a dollar bill. My dad was excited. He was anxious to get out and into the world and see what was new that day, even though he was going to the same job, same places, the same people. He still looked forward to that new and exciting experience every day. He found a way to live, not just exist. Most of us say you only live once. I don't believe that. I believe you die once, but I believe you can live every day. We just don't choose to. Most of us, including myself for the longest time, we wake up, we go to work, we do our work, we come home, we watch TV, we go to bed. We wake up, we go to work, we do our work. It's like wash, rinse, repeat. We're not living. My dad, again, he thrived on living. He took us a lot of times. I have two brothers and a sister, 3 siblings. My dad loved his job as a fuel delivery person in Orange County, where he drove out to the farms of Orange County and delivered fuel for their tractors. And we all got to go with him, which was so amazing, because one time I thought, why would my dad pick this as a living? I mean, he could have done probably anything, but my dad said, he didn't say anything. When I asked him, I said, why did you pick a job like this? I mean, driving out to farms every day, doesn't it ever get boring? My dad held up a finger and he walked over, because it was fall. We were in the cornfield, and he walked over and he grabbed 2 ears of corn off of the stalk, brought them back, and we shucked them right there, right in front of us. And he handed me one and he said, go ahead and eat. Let's have some lunch. And we ate that corn warmed only by the sun. And oh my gosh, it was the best corn I've ever had. To this day, I prefer corn uncooked. I want it just on the cob, warmed by the sun. And every time I eat it, it takes me back to that day with my dad. And my dad just smiled as he was doing this. I mean, he knew what he was doing. He knew how to live. Liberty. When it came to liberty, my dad was born in 1919. He grew up, as a teenager, right into the Depression. And during that time, in 1937, he joined the U.S. Army. This was odd because my family's Quaker, and Quaker are very much, you don't want to get into the Army, you don't want to do this, but my dad felt that he needed to join because he wanted everyone to have the liberty that the United States offered. And the way to do that was to do his part, and he joined the Army. And at that time, he also, in 1941, in the middle of 1941, he married his lifetime sweetheart, my mom, who he knew from the day she was christened. And he knew then that that was just going to be his wife. And in 1941, they had a full military wedding because he finally got his second stripe. He could afford to get married. And also in 1941, he knew that in December, he would be getting out of the Army. Then something really weird happened out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean in a territory called Hawaii. And suddenly my dad was in for the duration. But like he was later in life when I knew him, because this was way before, he knew he was in for the duration, but he still lived every day, again, like that kid in the candy store. He wanted to know, okay, what's going on? And they shipped my dad to China, Burma, India, or the CBI theater. And that's where he spent the duration of the war, was in India, in a land that had 130-degree temperatures during the daytime. And he loved talking about his experiences over there, because he said when he was here in the United States, stationed in Seattle, Washington, he had to carry his .45 revolver pistol and his rifle everywhere he went in Seattle. If he went anywhere, he had to have his guns. He said, then the war started. They ship him across the ocean to China, Burma, India, and they never issued him a gun because he was in the quartermasters. All he did was drive. And he thought that was just so funny how he had to be so armed here in the United States and totally unarmed for most of the duration of the war. But he did his part. And in 1945, when the war came to an end, my dad had enough points that he was able to board the Queen Mary with 15,000 other soldiers on a ship that was designed for 2,000 people. And he came home on that ship. And he said, even that to him was an adventure, because he said, you woke up in the morning and you got in line to go to the shower. You got out of the shower and you got in line for breakfast. You had your breakfast, you got in line for the restroom. When you got out of there, you got in line for lunch. I think you know where this is going. His whole time on the ship was spent in lines. He never got out of line, but he enjoyed the trip back over across the Atlantic aboard the Queen Mary. And the first time he shared that with us was when we were actually visiting on the Queen Mary. And he was pointing out how, see how those bunks in there look, like you've got a couple feet of space between everybody? He says, you don't. He says, once the first person's on the top, you've now got this much space going down and down and down. You didn't have enough room to roll over. But he said he knew that on that voyage, he was coming home. Which brings us to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. As I said, my dad married his childhood sweetheart. When my mom was christened at the age of 5, my dad was there at the church, and he fell in love then. If there were ever two people soul matched together, it was my mom and dad. The only girl he ever dated, the only girl he ever took out, and in 1941 married her, and that was where the beginning of my siblings first came in. My oldest brother Jim was born in 1942, and then I have another brother, so he's 19 years older than me. I have a brother who's 15 years older, a sister who's 10 years older, and then apparently they took a hiatus because along came me 10 years after my sister. But in the pursuit of happiness, my siblings and I, we get together once a month and we have breakfast. And last month we were talking, do any of you ever remember hearing mom and dad fight? And we were thinking, no, not once. And if you really think about that, my oldest brother being 19 years older than me, and I didn't get married till 24. So that's a 43-year span that none of us can recall a single fight that my mom and dad ever had. And I came across a videotape fairly recently, and it was at my parents' church. They were talking to my dad about, they were coming up on their 65th wedding anniversary. And they were asking my dad, well, how do you do this? And my dad, in his infinite, don't talk much wisdom, looked over and he said, well, it's like this. My wife is more important than me ever being right. And my wife is the most important thing in the world. And there is success. My dad found out how to have a life of almost 90 years of happiness, almost 67 years by the time he passed on of being married to his childhood sweetheart, the love of his life. And his success was he put everyone else first before him. I'd like to close with the very first speech that I ever gave. This speech first speech I ever gave was not in Toastmasters. It was shortly before I joined Toastmasters. And this was the speech at my dad's funeral. My dad passed away on Christmas Day, 2008. And this was the very first time I ever spoke publicly, by the way. I did not like it then. I'm still not the most comfortable speaking in public, but this was my tribute to my dad. What a wonderful Christmas present. My dad woke up on Christmas Day, standing on two strong legs, looking out the gates of heaven with eyes that no longer needed glasses. And I'm sure St. Peter was there, and he came to my dad and shook his hand and said, welcome home, Don. And we'll get back to that scene in a moment. If you knew my dad, you would know that he was a very strong Christian. And I don't mean a Sunday Christian by any means of the word. My dad was an everyday Christian, and he carried on literally conversations with Jesus every single day. My brothers and I, my sister, we knew that this was Dad. We knew when we went on that truck with him, my dad would be singing hymns. He would be talking to Jesus, as he was driving down the road. And he was an unafraid Christian. And growing up, we knew that every morning when we woke up, we could come out to we had a wall furnace right by our kitchen, and we'd wake up in the winter and we go and sit in front of that to get kind of warm. And we all knew that if we looked around the corner at 5:30, my dad would be there having breakfast, and he would be having his toast, 4 slices of butter on it, applesauce on top of that, and then some raspberries. He'd have a cup of coffee, and he'd be reading the most well-worn Bible you could ever imagine. But more than that, all 4 of us knew that if we went up to him, he would never say, "Not now," or "Come back later." He would pick us up and set us down in his lap, and he would read the Bible to us. My dad drove a gas truck for a living, delivering to farmers in Orange County, and some of my favorite memories are going along with him, as I told you before. I talked about, going out and taking that ear of corn, eating it right there in the field, but that wasn't the only thing. We went to strawberry fields when it was strawberry season and had the most wonderful fresh strawberries you could ever have. My favorite moments are literally biting into strawberries that were just so juicy, they were messy. And then seeing my dad smiling as he watched us, all of us growing up, and saw the joy that we had sharing in his life. I knew that my dad could have gotten any job he wanted when he got out of the military. He was a master tech sergeant. He could literally take engines apart and put them back together blindfolded. But when we asked him why he didn't do that, it would have paid so much more. His answer was, "True, but I couldn't take you with me if I did that." And we learned so much about how he cared. I never did see, again, my parents getting mad at each other. And I also never saw my dad get mad. And again, my dad drove a truck in Southern California in the same traffic that you and I drive in, with the same idiots all around us. And where I would blow it and I would give all kinds of hand gestures involving very few fingers and the works, my dad would sit there and he'd shake his head and then he would offer up a prayer for that person. And it's like I said, so many of us, I remember there was an age where we all wore those WWJD bracelets. What would Jesus do? And I was thinking, if they only knew my dad, they could watch him, and his would actually, instead of saying, "What would Jesus do?" his bracelets would said, "Watch what Jesus did." I mean, it was just amazing to watch the faith of this man. Now, back to that opening scene, Christmas Day. Christmas Day, 2008. My dad's standing there shaking St. Peter's hand, and I see St. Peter walking with my dad, and all the people are waiting to get into heaven, and some of them are wondering why my dad is going ahead of everybody. But St. Peter keeps on taking him in, and they go up to the throne of Jesus, and Peter shakes his hand once more and whispers, "He's been waiting for you." And I'm reminded of a song by Mercy Me. And the song is, I can't remember the title of the song, but the song goes, "Surrounded by your glory, what will my heart feel? Will I dance for you, Jesus, or in awe of you be still? Will I stand in your presence, or to my knees will I fall? Will I sing hallelujah? Will I be able to speak at all?" And I can only imagine that at that point, my dad's standing in front of the throne, and I see Jesus get up and walk down. My dad's not surprised by seeing Jesus, not surprised by how he looks. I mean, he's been having a daily conversation for his 90 years. And Jesus comes down and reaches out, puts his hand on my dad's shoulders, and they look in each other's eyes. And suddenly my dad smiles his crooked smile with his teeth that just light up a room. And then him and Jesus just start laughing and hugging each other in joy. My dad was the son of a preacher, who was the son of a preacher, who is the son of a preacher, but my dad wasn't. That's not saying that my dad may not ever have stood in front of 10,000 people and spoke about Jesus. Never in a stadium, but my dad stood before thousands of people and spoke about Jesus. And if all the people that he touched were at my dad's funeral, it would have filled an entire stadium. In the movie Mr. Megorium's Wonder Emporium, Mr. Megorium, who is a 200-year-old man who has a toy store, and he has an assistant. And one day he comes up and tells his assistant that tonight he's going to die. And he knew that. And the assistant is there, and when he's on his bed, she's crying, and he asks her, "What's wrong?" And she says, "Mr. Megorium, you can't die. You have to live." And Mr. Megorium reaches down, touches her cheek, and says, "I have lived." That's my dad. He took life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and he owned them more than anybody I have ever known. That was my father, the most successful man. And if there's anything you can take away, live every day like it's your last day, and start every day like it's your first day, and pretend you're a kid in the candy store and you just found a dollar bill. Thank you.
My, thank you, Dan. That is not what I expected and not what I advertised you at. We weren't laughing in the aisles, but we were inspired. And I think maybe more than one of the audience was moved to a moist eye or two. You have inspired me to think about next May and next June Speakers Bureau themes. Maybe we'll do some Mother's Day and Father's Day speeches. And that would be very good and inspiring for all of us.